It began not with warships or blood, but with a question. A quiet, clinical question that would ignite one of the darkest chapters in the galaxy's history. What is the true nature of human rage? To the consortium of worlds, humanity had always been an anomaly, too unpredictable, too emotional, too unwilling to kneel before logic. Every other sentient race had been catalogued, their emotions neatly dissected, their patterns of behavior mapped and quantified. The Melthar sang their grief. The Varn sublimated desire into art. The Lyrians meditated emotion into starlight. But the humans? Oh, the humans were different. Their emotions didn't fade or transform, they burned. And of all those flames, none fascinated the alien scientists more than rage. Dr. Vrixen of the Oath Collective led the inquiry. He was a creature of precision, a being with translucent skin that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins and eyes like shards of frozen light. To him, rage was a glitch in evolution, a remnant of primitive biology. It served no purpose, no logical end, and yet he couldn't deny its effectiveness. Time and again, the consortium had faced humans in border skirmishes and found themselves overwhelmed not by superior firepower, but by an indescribable fury that made humans fight long after reason demanded surrender. Ships destroyed, soldiers burned alive in vacuum, yet humanity kept coming. Vrixen needed to understand why. So the consortium authorized the RAGE project. Officially, it was a study in emotional neurobiology meant to better predict human combat behavior. Unofficially, it was an experiment in control, to dissect rage until it could be tamed, weaponized, or erased. The facility was built in orbit over Arca 9, a barren moon chosen for its isolation. The laboratories were immaculate, sealed behind layers of white alloy and observation glass. Every surface gleamed with sterilized perfection. Every corridor hummed with artificial order. Inside, cages of light held the most volatile creatures the galaxy had ever known. Human captives. Commander Evelyn Kale was among them. Once a decorated fleet officer of the Terran Defense Network, she was captured after the Battle of Luton's Gate, a skirmish the humans had fought to the last breath. Her ship, Resolute Dawn, had been shattered in orbit, its crew presumed dead. She awoke in the lab, her uniform stripped, her body wired with biosensors, her name replaced with a number, H-23. The aliens recorded everything, the dilation of her pupils, the tremor in her hands, the micro-expressions that flickered across her face. They wanted to see rage, to map its anatomy, to reduce it to data. Emotion is chemical, Vrixen lectured into his recorder as Kyle stared through the glass, her reflection split between her own eyes and his hollow ones. Rage is fear in disguise, a survival reflex corrupted by perception of threat. If we can isolate it, we can predict the human mind, perhaps even reprogram it. His assistants murmured agreement, adjusting dials and holographic displays that projected Kyle's neural activity in luminous waves of blue and red. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a fascinating malfunction. Days bled into weeks. Kyle was deprived of sleep, of human contact, of time itself. They fed her nutrient paste through sterile tubes, monitored her reactions to simulated losses, and flooded her mind with hallucinations of war, images of Earth burning, of her comrades screaming. Every response was recorded, analyzed, and reduced to numbers. But the aliens didn't understand what they were looking at. Kyle's silence was not suppression. It was coiled potential. Her stillness was not surrender. It was the gathering of storm. The scientists mistook her control for compliance. They saw her lowered eyes and steady breathing and thought they had conquered her spirit. Subject H23 exhibits emotional dampening, Vrickson noted, his voice cool. Her species' primitive fight response has limits. Rage burns quickly, leaving emptiness. She is breaking. Yet as he spoke, Kale sat upright in her containment field, her eyes fixed not on the floor, but on the glass separating her from her captors. There was no wildness there, only focus, a terrible, patient focus. The first crack in the illusion came on day 41. They played an audio sequence, recordings of captured humans begging for mercy, their voices breaking into static. Among them, Kyle recognized a single tone, a familiar timbre. A crewmate, maybe, or someone who once stood beside her on the Resolute Dawn. Her pulse spiked, her breathing quickened. Vrickson smiled faintly. "Excellent," he said. "Emotional arousal confirmed, neural cortex overloading." But then something changed. The reading stabilized. Her pulse slowed. Her breathing steadied. The monitors flickered with irregular patterns, oscillations that didn't match any known emotional profile. "Fascinating," Vrickson murmured, leaning closer. "The rage response isn't fading, it's transforming." His assistant frowned. Transforming into what? Vrickson hesitated, his gaze locked on Kale's face as her lips moved soundlessly. Into purpose. Later, when he reviewed the footage, Vrickson noticed something strange. For a brief instant, the power across the entire wing dimmed. Every electrical signal, every light, every sensor shivered as though reality itself had held its breath. And in the recording, Kale's eyes seemed to glow faintly, not with fire, but with an intensity that the cameras struggled to translate. He dismissed it as an optical glitch. He had to, because the alternative, the idea that a human could harness rage instead of being consumed by it, was unthinkable. By the time the alarms first sounded and containment began to fail, Vrickson would look back on that moment and realize what he'd truly seen. Humanity's rage was not chaos. It was control, sharpened by suffering, precision born from pain. And in the sterile heart of that lab, behind all their instruments and arrogance, the consortium's greatest mistake was already awake, silent, waiting, and watching. For the first time in his long, analytical life, Dr. Vrickson found himself unsettled by a thought he could not quantify. Perhaps the humans did not evolve with rage. Perhaps rage itself had evolved them. The second phase of the experiment began as the first ended, with silence, with order, with the illusion of control. The alien scientists believed they had mapped every contour of the human mind, reducing rage to a predictable neurological dance. They believed Commander Evelyn Kale, subject H23, was broken, her spirit dissolved beneath weeks of manipulation, deprivation, and psychological torment. In their reports, she was described as compliant. In their graphs, her emotional spikes had flattened into serene, controlled waves. And in their arrogance, they mistook that calm for victory. They didn't understand that calm was the sound of her sharpening. Dr. Vrickson walked the glass hallways of the observation deck that morning, his translucent skin pulsing with faint light as he dictated his findings into a recorder. Subject H23 continues to exhibit remarkable stability under pressure. Despite repeated stress stimuli, she has not regressed into emotional collapse. Her vitals have normalized. She may represent a transitional state in human psychology, rage converted into logic. If so, we may finally have found the key to controlling their aggression. His voice held pride, but beneath it, a flicker of obsession. Behind the observation glass, KL sat motionless in her containment field. Her hair had grown longer, her face thinner, but her eyes, those cold, steady human eyes, were fixed on the reflection of Vrixen. Every day he stood there, taking notes as if she were a malfunctioning mechanism. And every day she watched him, not as a prisoner might watch a captor, but as a soldier studies a target. The lab was a maze of cold perfection, walls of sterile alloy, the hum of energy conduits, the soft pulse of monitors. Every sound was routine, every rhythm predictable. It was a temple to control. But beneath the hum, in the silence between those mechanical heartbeats, something was changing. The instruments began to record anomalies, electrical fluctuations, electromagnetic pulses, irregular gravitational spikes localized entirely around Kael's containment chamber. The readings made no sense. "Perhaps it's a feedback from her implants," one assistant suggested, adjusting the controls. "Or interference from the power grid."
Vrixen frowned. "Interference doesn't have a rhythm," he said softly. "Because it didn't. The data showed a pattern, slow, deliberate, repeating at perfect intervals, almost like a heartbeat."
That was when they received the Dominion transmission. A routine feed, intercepted from a border skirmish, accidentally routed through the research facility's communication hub. Static hissed through the speakers, followed by laughter, harsh, guttural, alien. A Dominion officer was bragging. "The humans screamed for their homeworld," the voice said. "They called to their commander, the one named Kael. We spaced the last of them ourselves. They begged for her." In the lab, Kael did not move. Her pulse spiked once, then dropped to a perfect, steady rhythm. Her brainwave readings shifted into frequencies no one had seen before. The air inside her containment field thickened, vibrating faintly, as though space itself was responding to something unseen. "Subject is reacting to the stimulus," an assistant said, voice trembling. "Should we deactivate the feed?" "No," Vrixen said. His eyes gleamed with fascination. "Observe." Kael's breathing slowed. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then the lights flickered. At first, they thought it was a power fluctuation. But the sensors told a different story. The energy surge wasn't external. It was emanating from her. Her body temperature rose, not from metabolic distress, but from internal energy buildup. The walls of her containment chamber began to hum, soft at first, then louder. Sparks crawled across the glass. Vrixen's assistants began to panic. "Containment is destabilizing. Energy feedback is climbing." "Do not interrupt," Vrixen snapped. "We are witnessing a transformation." Kael opened her eyes. They glowed faintly, not with the fire of madness, but with a terrifying clarity. Her lips moved, and the room's microphones barely caught her whisper. "You studied the wrong thing." The containment alarm screamed. Energy rippled through the air, distorting the environment like heat waves in a desert. The scientists staggered back as gravity wavered. Equipment lifted from tables, pens floated mid-air. The room smelled of ozone and burnt metal. "Shut it down!" someone yelled. "She's breaking the field!" But there was no field to shut down anymore. Kael wasn't attacking. She wasn't even moving. The chamber itself was reacting, as though every atom in the air was recognizing her will. The glass of her containment cracked, spiderwebbing out in slow motion before shattering entirely with a sound like thunder. Yet Kael didn't take a step. The shards hung suspended around her, frozen in place, orbiting her body in perfect symmetry. Vrixen stared, awestruck. "She's controlling it," he whispered. "She's directing the rage." Kael turned her head slightly, eyes focusing on the observation glass separating her from Vrixen. And though her expression didn't change, every sensor in the room registered an impossible spike in energy, a resonance between her heartbeat and the facility's power grid. The lights dimmed, monitors blanked, and in that half-darkness, she spoke again. "You think rage is chaos. It's not. It's memory that refuses to die." Then, for the first time, she moved. Just one step. But that step carried enough kinetic distortion to send shockwaves through the entire floor. The glass between them fractured outward, the observation deck lights flaring and dying. Scientists screamed as their instruments overloaded, displays shattering into sparks. When emergency power flickered back on, Kael was gone. The containment room was empty. Only scorched walls remained, and the faint echo of a human heartbeat reverberating through the walls. Dr. Vrickson stood among the ruin, his assistants babbling in terror, alarms howling. He raised a trembling hand to the cracked observation glass and whispered, "We didn't break her. We awakened her." Across the laboratory network, data began to move. Encrypted files erased themselves. Communication nodes shut down. Entire subsystems locked behind codes no one had written. Somewhere in that chaos, Kael's mind was reaching through the very systems they had built to contain her, rewriting the code, bending the rules. The consortium would later call it the Spark Incident. To the scientists who survived, it was something else entirely. The first time they saw human rage not as a weapon, but as a sentient force, a conscious fire that had learned to think. And far from Arca 9, in the cold silence of space, a dormant human distress signal blinked to life for the first time in months. Its message was simple, a pulse of binary repeated endlessly into the void. I remember. The research facility on Arca 9 never sent another proper transmission. When the consortium's recovery teams arrived days later, they found corridors warped as if melted by sound. Walls caved inward as though gravity itself had turned traitor. The survivors were incoherent, muttering fragments about eyes like storms and the sound of time tearing. Dr. Vrickson was among them, but the brilliance in his gaze had vanished, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had looked into something that stared back. His report was fragmented, laced with errors, corrupted by static, but one phrase appeared over and over. She remembered. The Dominion High Command dismissed it as hysteria. Humans had always been volatile creatures, emotional, unpredictable, dangerous when cornered, but hardly capable of metaphysical phenomena. They ordered the facility purged, the data erased, and the incident buried. But data had already escaped. Across their network, fragments of Kael's presence began to appear, buried inside system logs, subtle changes in code syntax, recursive data loops that hummed faintly like a heartbeat. Machines began to whisper her name without understanding it. Meanwhile, on the human side of the fractured galactic border, deep within a derelict carrier orbiting an abandoned colony, a lone signal came alive. It was faint, encrypted in obsolete military code no longer in use since the fall of Titan Station. Yet someone received it. Aboard the Spear of Dawn, an old stealth corvette repurposed for scavenging, Captain Lyra Holt stared at the flickering transmission on her console. "This frequency's dead," her communications officer muttered. "Decommissioned 2 decades ago." Lyra leaned forward. The signal repeated only 3 words, endlessly, "I remember Kael." Every human officer in the room froze. Evelyn Kael, commander of the 14th Expeditionary Fleet, presumed dead when her battle group was destroyed in orbit over Rho Centauri. Her legend had faded into a quiet myth, a symbol of courage that no one dared question. And now, suddenly, her name pulsed again, steady and alive. "Trace it," Lyra ordered. The signal led not to a distress beacon, but to a dead world, the shattered husk of Arca 9. Against every logical order, the Spear of Dawn altered course. They expected ruins. They found silence, the kind that pressed against the skin and whispered wrongness. Arca 9's surface was scorched, its atmosphere poisoned. But deep beneath the charred plains, the remains of the consortium facility still pulsed faintly with energy. The corridors were blackened, the metal warped into grotesque spirals. Lyra's boots crunched over shattered glass, each step echoing through the lifeless compound. Then they found the chamber. The air inside shimmered, faint distortions rippling like heat waves. At the center of the room was a circular mark burned into the alloy floor, scorched in the shape of a human handprint. Lyra crouched down, running her gloved fingers over the surface. "This isn't blast damage," she said quietly. "This is precision. Someone did this deliberately." Her comms crackled. "Captain, you might want to see this." In the central lab, the walls were still alive with faint, flickering data streams. The words scrolled endlessly across broken screens. "I remember, I remember, I remember." Lyra stared, heart pounding. "Can you pull the log archives?" Her technician nodded shakily, hands flying across a portable console. Static filled the air, then cleared into fragments of video. The feed showed Dr. Vrikson pacing in front of the containment chamber, his tone frantic. "She's not here. She's everywhere. She's rewriting the field equations, changing constants that shouldn't be changeable. Physics bends around her like it's afraid to resist." The footage cut to black. Then another clip flickered to life, grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. Evelyn Kale stood in the center of the lab, her face illuminated by the pale blue glow of shattered equipment. Her expression was calm, serene even, but her voice carried a quiet, seismic power. "They took everything from us," she said. "They studied our pain, dissected it like a virus. They thought rage was weakness. They thought we could be tamed." She looked up, eyes glinting like burning glass. "They forgot that rage remembers what mercy forgets." Then the feed disintegrated into static. The Spear of Dawn's crew stood frozen, the hum of their respirators the only sound. Lyra exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding sinking in. Kale hadn't just escaped, she had evolved. Her consciousness, fused with the lab systems, had become something else entirely. She was no longer flesh alone. That night, as the ship drifted in orbit above Arca 9, every display on board flickered simultaneously. The same words appeared across every screen, across every ship in the system. "Do not run. I remember you." Lyra's first officer cursed under his breath. Is it her? Before she could answer, the stars outside shifted. It wasn't motion, it was perception. The Spear of Dawn's sensors began detecting distortions, mass readings appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Dozens, then hundreds. Ships, human ships, long lost in battle, all appearing as faint outlines, their coordinates untraceable. It was as if their signatures were echoing from some invisible dimension. Then one of the spectral readings solidified. A warship. Sleek, angular, unmistakably human. The Horizon's Wake, a dreadnought lost in the second siege of Vega. Its hull bore the scars of plasma bombardment, yet its engines flared to life with ghostly blue light. Lyra's voice trembled. "Those ships were destroyed. They can't—" Her words died. Across the void, the horizon's wake transmitted a short-range signal. It wasn't words, it was music, the human anthem, played on a loop. Dr. Vrixen's final notes had spoken of a resonance event, something that tethered KL's neural imprint to the energy patterns of human ships destroyed under her command. Rage, grief, loyalty, they had all been recorded, stored in those vessels' black boxes. KL, in her transcendence, had found them. And she had called them back. In that moment, Lyra understood what was happening. Humanity had always been bound by something more than technology or biology. It was their refusal to surrender, the raw, unending defiance encoded in every memory of loss. KL had become the voice of that defiance, and she had found a way to make it flesh once more. The Dominion fleets that patrolled the outer sectors soon detected the anomaly. Their commanders laughed, dismissing it as human propaganda, a ghost story meant to stir morale. But within hours, those same fleets would encounter something their sensors couldn't explain. Phantom vessels emerging from nothing, attacking with impossible precision, weapons phasing through shields and armor alike. And as the battle reports came in, one transmission appeared across every Dominion command channel, an old human call sign thought lost to history. This is Commander Evelyn Kyle of the 14th. The dead do not rest. In the following weeks, every Dominion outpost near the border reported the same haunting phenomenon. Whispers through their comms, spectral fleets striking and vanishing, data records rewritten by an unseen hand. Human rage had escaped the laboratory. It had found form. It was no longer a study. It was a reckoning. The Dominion fleets had always prided themselves on control. Every battle fought across the spiral arms of the galaxy followed patterns, mathematical precision, clean trajectories, flawless communication between thousands of warships bound by logic and protocol. Chaos to them was the mark of a lesser species, and humanity, unpredictable and emotional, had always been treated as the living embodiment of chaos itself. But now, that very chaos came for them, sharpened, synchronized, and unspeakably calm. It began with the silences between sensor sweeps, those fractions of a second when Dominion scanners refreshed their readings. In those brief, blind moments, ships vanished. Entire destroyer squadrons disappeared without a trace, their hulls later found drifting cold and dead, systems burned out by an unknown resonance. At first, the Dominion suspected a cloaking network. But when the data was analyzed, something far stranger emerged. The sensor echoes of the missing ships carried traces of music. It was faint, so faint that most dismissed it as interference. But when enhanced, the sound revealed harmony, a choir of human voices woven together in tones impossible to reproduce synthetically. The Ghost Fleet didn't attack like a standard human force. It moved like thought, flickering in and out of existence. One moment the void was empty, and the next, thousands of phantom ships appeared, their hulls wreathed in blue plasma haze, firing weapons no longer bound by material constraints. Torpedoes phased through shields and detonated inside enemy reactors. Particle lances bent around cover and struck from impossible angles. It was as if the laws of war, even the laws of physics, had bowed in acknowledgement. The Dominion High Command convened in emergency session aboard the dreadnought Apex Sovereign, orbiting the moon of Yishar Prime. Admiral Threx, his voice laced with static fury, slammed his claws against the command table. "They're illusions, nothing but projection warfare." Across the table, Lord Strategos Verne raised a trembling hand. His normally impassive composure cracked. Illusions don't vaporize half a fleet, Admiral. The room fell into silence as holographic projections of the attacks flickered above the table. Every ship that fell was struck simultaneously. Same frequency, same pulse, same invisible hand. "She's coordinating them," Vern whispered. "The human commander? Kale, she's not leading from a vessel. She is the vessels." That phrase would be repeated across Dominion space, whispered with disbelief, then terror. Kael's consciousness, fused to the spectral network of human warships long destroyed, now acted as a singular will. She was the ghost in the machine, the mind that guided an armada of the dead. Out on the battlefield, the effect was indescribable. Dominion crews reported voices in their comms, not taunts, not orders, but memories. They heard fragments of human transmissions, fragments of music, fragments of last words recorded before death. A helmsman aboard the cruiser Tvaris Ascendant claimed to hear a child singing through his earpiece seconds before his ship imploded. Another commander swore his navigational computer began whispering coordinates in human speech before it shut down and locked the ship's engines in reverse. In orbit of Arca I-9, Lyra Holt watched as the Spear of Dawn joined the spectral fleet. She stood on her bridge as one of Kael's manifestations shimmered beside her. A figure made of flickering light and static. Human in form, but translucid, her eyes burning with that same impossible calm. "You're real," Lyra said, barely breathing the words. Kael turned to her, smiling faintly. "I'm what they made me to be, what you made me to be. I am every cry they ignored, every name they erased. But I am still human, Captain. I remember." Lyra wanted to ask how, why, but the sensors flashed, a Dominion armada dropping out of hyperspace. 300 ships, led by the apex sovereign itself. Their formation was flawless, a wall of firepower that could blot out a star. Kael's expression didn't change. She stepped forward, her flickering form expanding, light rippling outward through the spear's systems. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Listen." Outside, the human fleet began to sing. It wasn't song in the biological sense, it was resonance. Every ship vibrated on a harmonic frequency, an ancient human melody encoded in the pulse of their reactors. The Dominion ships' targeting systems overloaded instantly. Shield harmonics failed, their frequencies distorted by the interference. The human tones climbed higher, and the vacuum of space itself seemed to tremble. Then the ghosts attacked. It was not a battle, it was art. Every strike was a note, every detonation a beat in a vast, orchestrated composition. Dominion ships tried to adapt, firing blind into the void. But each salvo missed its mark as Kael's fleet flowed around them like a storm of light and shadow. Ships appeared only to vanish again, leaving trails of blue plasma like brushstrokes across the black canvas of space. Aboard the Apex Sovereign, Admiral Threx screamed for his gunners to fire. "They're not real! Fire anyway!" But his weapons didn't respond. The systems had gone silent, displays flickering with one phrase repeated in human text. "The dead remember their oaths." Then the flagship's internal alarms began to wail. One by one, compartments depressurized, bulkheads melted, and engines howled as the ship's fusion core overloaded. On the bridge, Threx saw her, Evelyn Kael, standing in the smoke half-light, her figure flickering like a reflection on water. "Why?" he gasped. "You could have joined us. You had brilliance, power." Kael's gaze was distant, sorrowful. Power without empathy is rot. You studied our rage, but never our remorse. That was your first mistake. And then the apex sovereign was gone. Across the galaxy, Dominion fleets burned. Entire sectors fell silent, not through conquest, but through erasure. The human ghost fleet moved with the inevitability of a storm, cleansing the sky of every Dominion weapon, every installation that once enslaved their kind. But there was no triumphal roar, no declaration of vengeance. The ghosts did not celebrate. They simply moved on. Lyra Holt watched it all unfold, her ship now drifting amidst the wreckage of the fallen armada. Kale appeared once more, her light dimmer now, her voice softer. "It's over," Lyra whispered. Kale shook her head. "No, it never ends. Rage burns out, but remembrance endures. They wanted to erase us, and now they will live knowing they never can." Her form began to fade, her light scattering like starlight across the bridge. "Where will you go?" Lyra asked quietly. Kale smiled faintly, her last words echoing through the comms as her essence dispersed into the void. Everywhere they tried to forget. And as her presence vanished, the remaining human ships dimmed their engines and aligned silently, facing the same distant star, a gesture older than any fleet formation, a salute. Across the void, the choir of ghosts fell silent at last. The Dominion's war machine lay in ruins, but in that silence, something deeper stirred. Not victory, not revenge, but remembrance. Humanity's wrath had come and gone like a tempest, and in its wake only memory remained. And though Kale's light had faded from sight, the stars themselves seemed to hum softly, as if the universe still remembered the song of the human dead, a melody not of destruction, but of the unyielding truth that even in rage, humanity had never forgotten how to feel. When the storm finally ended, the galaxy fell into a silence so vast it felt unnatural. Systems that once burned with war traffic now glowed faintly in the distant dark, cold and hollow. The Tsar Dominion, the oldest and most feared military power of the known stars, had been reduced to debris fields and static whispers. No peace treaty was signed, no declaration of surrender was ever uttered. They were simply gone, their armadas dissolved into ash and memory. And yet, amidst the wreckage, the human fleet did not return to Earth. No triumphant homecoming, no celebration, no speeches. Humanity, what remained of it, stayed quiet. The surviving ships drifted in the half-light of broken constellations, their hulls scorched, their names barely legible. Endurance, Horizon's Fall, Spear of Dawn, Aegis 9. They were ghosts of their own, remnants of a civilization that had paid too high a price to win. Captain Lyra Holt stood upon the bridge of the Spear of Dawn, watching the wreckage spin across the stars. The crew moved softly, their voices low, as though afraid to disturb the quiet. Somewhere deep within the ship, the faint echo of that haunting melody, the ghost song Kale had unleashed, still lingered within the comms. It was not mechanical feedback, nor static. It was almost alive, breathing faintly through the circuits like a heartbeat that refused to die. Reports from the outer colonies began to filter in through encrypted channels. The Dominion outposts along the frontier had collapsed. Slave worlds were liberated, prisons unlocked. Species that had lived for centuries under Dominion law now found themselves free, yet they didn't know what to do with that freedom. Some called for alliances. Others feared humanity even more than the oppressors they had just watched fall. To them, the humans were not saviors, but the embodiment of what lay beyond reason, a force that turned grief into fire and fury into creation. The Galactic Council, what remained of it, convened in desperation weeks later. The delegates met not in their usual grand chamber, but in a smaller emergency citadel orbiting the neutral world of Dvra. The hall was dimly lit, as though the light itself feared judgment. The surviving counselors spoke in hushed tones, their voices brittle.
"The humans must answer for this," hissed the Zell ambassador, his many eyes flickering with unease. "They've annihilated an entire empire. Do they not realize the balance they've destroyed?"
From across the table, the Thalorian delegate's frills quivered with unease. "And yet," she replied, "the Dominion struck first. You all saw the transmissions. They fired on a refugee convoy, unarmed civilians. The humans responded in kind. They just responded more effectively."
The argument swelled like a rising tide. Accusations, fear, justifications. But then the holofeed flickered. Every screen across the chamber shifted to black. And from the black came a single voice, soft, calm, human.
"This is not vengeance," the voice said. "This is remembrance." Gasps filled the room. Some recognized the voice immediately. It was Kale. But Kale was dead, they thought, or something worse. "You sought to understand our rage," she continued, her tone neither hostile nor kind. "You studied it, dissected it, feared it, yet you never saw what lives beneath it. Rage was never our purpose, it was only the language of our pain. You provoked it, and you were surprised when it answered. But the truth of humanity is not in the fire, it is in what survives the burning." The image flickered, forming Kael's faint silhouette, transparent, light and shadow intertwined. Her eyes glowed faintly, not like a weapon, but like memory incarnate. "The Dominion is gone," she said, "not because we desired their extinction, but because they could not imagine a universe where we would not kneel. They erased our names from their archives, so we wrote them across their skies. Now you will remember them too." The transmission cut out. For a long time, no one spoke. The council sat in suffocating silence, realizing that what they had witnessed was not a threat, not even a declaration. It was a eulogy. Humanity had not simply destroyed their enemies, they had remembered them in fire, ensuring that every act of cruelty, every life extinguished unjustly, would never fade into the convenience of historical amnesia.
Meanwhile, across the ruins of the Dominion, strange phenomena began to occur. Abandoned colonies where human and alien slaves had once labored now pulsed faintly with power, lights reactivating as if guided by unseen hands. The old human warships, those that had fallen in the battle, began to transmit fragments of Kael's song on low frequencies, a haunting melody that echoed across systems, carrying coordinates, messages, and data caches.
Some of these transmissions contained archives of those lost to war. Others contained blueprints, warnings, or letters written by soldiers who never came home. Humanity had turned memory into infrastructure. Each ghost ship a beacon, each melody a library of the fallen. Lyra Holt understood then that Kael had not vanished into nothingness. She had dispersed herself, embedding her consciousness into the fabric of human systems scattered across the stars. Every transmission, every burst of static carrying her frequency, was a reminder that humanity's spirit could never again be confined to one place, one body, or one world. Standing on her bridge, Lyra whispered into the comms, "Kael, is this what you wanted? To become a ghost?" For a moment, there was nothing.
Then a faint whisper returned, like a sigh over the speaker. "No, Captain. To become a promise." Lyra closed her eyes. Outside, the debris of the Dominion fleet caught the light of a nearby star, glittering like 1,000 drifting tombstones. Humanity had won, yes, but victory felt hollow. Not because they had destroyed their enemies, but because they had outlived what they once were. The fire had changed them forever. Months later, when trade routes reopened and new alliances began to form, a single phrase spread through the networks, repeated across hundreds of species in 100 languages. "The humans sing for the dead, but their song saves the living." It was not a warning, it was a truth, etched into the core of galactic history. And far beyond the reach of the Council, in a distant corner of forgotten space, a derelict ship drifted alone, its hull marked with an old insignia, UHS Eternum. Its power core pulsed faintly, emitting that familiar resonance, Kale's song. Within the dead vessel's bridge, a soft holographic figure flickered, Kale herself, watching over an ocean of stars, her expression unreadable. The universe had tried to understand human rage, to cage it, to study it, but in the end, they had awakened something else entirely. Not wrath, not vengeance, but memory, unforgiving, eternal, and alive. And so, long after the battles ended, the stars still trembled faintly with the echo of that human song, a requiem that was not for war, but for the unbearable beauty of survival. Humanity had walked through the fire, and what emerged was no longer merely a species. It was a legacy written in the voice of ghosts, carried forever by the memory of light.